My name is Dave Erasmus. I'm a part of the community here at the Conduit. Really chuffed tonight to be exploring imagination and interaction with these guys, Louis Cole and Carl Gombrich, both dear friends of mine with completely different lives, completely different experiences, which we'll crack into throughout the evening, but both similarly made a really big impact in my life and have led me in different ways into different worlds. And from a conversation that we had recently at COP27, we started thinking about the importance at the heart of social impact, social change is what world are we taking people to? And if we're taking people to a different world, it has to first be imagined. So how do we explore that together? So that's how we got to this evening session. But it would be an absolute crime to sit like this and discuss with words something that needs to be so inhabited and embodied, shall we say. So for the first few minutes, I'm going to leave you in Louis' capable hands. People are like, oh my goodness, what have I let myself in for?
So we're going to play a little game. I need to urge at the beginning, this is not any kind of competition. This is a very collaborative game, so be careful, don't get too excited. We don't want anyone to get injured.
Take it easy.
Take it easy, it's not a race. Okay, so you may have noticed on the floor there's a pink string. Now, what I'd love you to do is reach down, if you can. If you can't, maybe move to another seat where you have access to the string. The completion of this will be, hopefully, that we can make a circle with this string around the edge of the room. Also, to make this even more fun, we're going to turn the lights off. Lights off. Perfect. But I do have to help us. So this will help us a lot, actually, because it makes the string glow. We've got a 5-minute window. I think you guys are going to nail this. You might need to climb through other people's loops of string, or...
I see some people helping.
You're doing great, everyone. This is... If you find yourself in a tangle, see if you can step over it. The aim is that it's one continuous circle at the end.
I see some people moved into helper role.
Wow. That was it. Guys, I thought that would be quick, but that was amazing. Should we turn the lights on and see if we actually did it? Because I can't really tell. Ooh.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Looking around.
Great teamwork. Right, round of applause, everyone. Give yourself a round of applause.
All right. So just stay there for a second, and I'll just explain why on earth we're doing this. What we wanted to do tonight was try something completely new, something completely experimental, and have that experience together and then begin to talk about it and reflect on it. So without further ado, Carl, do you want to tell us about what we're going to do next?
So it was experimental, and we actually wanted it to take a bit longer, naturally. We wanted you to be going through each other's legs and all that sort of stuff. It didn't quite happen, but I think there's still enough for us to talk about there. So now I think you can let go of the string and go back into your seats for a moment. And when that's done, you know, for real, at some great festival somewhere, you can say it did it here first, and it was Louis' trademark. What we wanted was to have you all tied up in knots and really having to confront each other, work out verbally, non-verbally, how to negotiate each other's space and end up in that position. Because then we'd like a discussion now on how that process is a metaphor for creatively tackling problems together. So does anyone have any thoughts about that? How would that work as a metaphor? What kind of things in that activity transfer over to problems which aren't just unraveling pieces of fluorescent string?
Thanks, Eddie.
Lovely.
Yes, so what you do is one person makes a move and you see that move and then you react to that move to make the next, you've got to make sense or you've got to make progress. So you then react to that move to get to the next step, and then the other person perhaps then will interact again to get to the next step. So you're gradually producing something together. It's in partnership, so you're not just doing it yourself, you're reacting to what the other person is doing. Creativity is a similar process, certainly if you're doing it in partnership.
Lovely. So somebody moves first, somebody
Yeah.
has to move first, but then there's some response and then it evolves in some way.
Yes.
Great. And there was a comment over here.
I think my comment was about the starting point. What you asked us to do felt like a problem at an organization, or there's like a goal, and then sometimes we see a struggle when nobody understands what the big picture is. And here we're like total 50 strangers sitting, and we are very clear what is the end point that we need to get to.
Right.
So this made this much easier to get there like so quickly.
So that's actually really helpful because you're talking about the metaphor sort of breaking down. It doesn't quite work as a metaphor because in many real situations the end goal isn't clear, whereas this was a very clear end goal. Great. Any other reflections on that?
We immediately had this chap over here asked me to join him, so I joined him, and I think a few others joined him, and so we had a little group just working together, and that encourages other people to work together. That's what I noticed.
Nice. Good. One more?
I think for me, one of the things that it makes me reflect on is the kind of problems that are being solved by people in this building all the time are these complex, fast-moving problems, and you've got a lot of different players scrabbling around trying to solve these problems, and you can quite easily imagine how people would be tripping over the chairs, tripping over the wire at the same moment, trying to solve the same problem but scrambling around and not communicating effectively. So
Right.
I can see the metaphor working in a non-collaborative way as well.
Yes.
And it really relates to a lot of the work that's happening here.
Thank you. That was all very rich. Thank you. So what I'd like to do now is just move the kind of level of abstraction of the conversation up a level and talk about the power of metaphor and analogizing. There's been work over the decades about teaching creativity, which is part of the theme tonight, and part of that thinking is, can we teach people how to analogize? And honestly, the jury is still out. It's very, very hard to have a science of creativity, though there are some stages which are well known. You can look up Wallace's 4 stages of creativity. But we don't really know whether we can teach creativity. We do know we can kill creativity. So as my friend Vin Walsh, who some people here will know, say, you can foster anything. Even if you can't teach stuff, you can foster it. And you can think how you would not foster creativity or you would kill it. Anytime anyone had an interesting original idea and offered it, you'd whack them over the head with a broom handle. Pretty soon, you'd have a very, very uncreative environment, uncreative school or establishment, whatever. So you can certainly foster creativity by trying to let people be creative. And one way you can do that is through asking people to analogize. Actually just saying, let's come up with some kind of analogy. So we're going to move into that in a second in small groups. But I just want to emphasize here that if we're going to be creative and try and solve problems together, we have to make some of these bold moves that even might seem a bit silly. And so many, well, all the ideas around us come from somewhere. It's very hard to keep track of this because ideas become like the air we breathe. They're just around us all the time. We don't notice them. They become our lingua franca of the day. But recently, I've been reading about ecosystems, particularly in business and in the social world. Everyone here will be familiar with this phrase, ecosystem. It seems difficult to think of the modern world without understanding the analogy, the metaphor, an ecosystem. Have a guess when the word ecosystem was coined, when someone came up with the idea of ecosystem. Yeah, absolutely right. Thank you. That's important also, the discipline. But when would you think about roughly that was come up with? Decade? No, that's pretty late. Okay, it's actually 1935, but it's less than 100 years ago. So how did you talk about the world in terms of ecosystems before 1935? They didn't have that vocabulary. They didn't have that interior architecture of the world. They didn't have that way of describing the world, that vision. Another one I love, and we'll come to why I like these things in a second before I send you to your groups, is friction. Apparently friction was only studied systematically by Leonardo da Vinci just about 500 years ago. Before that, how did people think about friction? Well, what was this? And now, friction is everywhere, in business, in relationships. The great military strategist Clausewitz talks about understanding friction as the most important thing to grasp in military strategy. That seems kind of obvious that he should talk about it like that, but it came from somewhere, Leonardo, thinking about the nature of friction, how things get stuck, how things don't move relative to one another, and then it got transported into all these different areas by analogy, where now it's so powerful in narrative, storytelling, getting people to see the world in new ways. A little bit of plug for my degree, and it's lovely to have Lucia, my student and soon-to-be research assistant here. And Ollie will know this from UCL, my previous life in education. We teach these things called super concepts, which are basically big ideas from history that emerge from a discipline. So it's nice that you brought up biology, but they emerge from some area of kind of intellectual activity. And it turns out they're such powerful ideas that over decades and centuries, they move out of their original area and become fantastic, powerful analogies and metaphors in other spaces. They literally remake the way people see the world, but in very different spaces from where they originally started. It's a wonderful journey to try and find these things. I literally discovered friction only this year, having been taught this stuff for 7 years, but I discovered Clausewitz, wonderful passage about military strategy and friction. I thought, wow, of course, friction. Then I Googled a bit, found it had only been studied by Leonardo systematically, I guess it's early 16th century. So a new one came into my radar. But other ones you'll be familiar with are things like natural selection. We know about evolution in biology, but you'll all have heard of memes now. Memes evolve just like organisms evolve. Memes are units of cultural organisms that evolve in very similar ways to biological organisms evolve, depending on their environment, their fitness, and so on. Entropy is another one. Entropy was studied by engineers to try and make engines less dangerous, more efficient. But now many of you will have heard of political entropy, social entropy, things falling apart, things decaying. It's a very, very powerful concept that grew up in one very specific technical area. Well, it's almost mystical what it had. It had so much to offer the world by its power, if you like. The analogical transfer into other areas wasn't so hard, and it came to have great impact in many, many other areas of life. So what I'd like you to do now, what we'd like you to do, is to get into small groups of 4 or 5. This is virtually impossible, this task, but we know how brilliant you are because you solved the circle problem in 30 seconds. We thought it was going to take you 5 minutes. And just have a think if you can come up with a super concept yourself. And then you have a group discussion. So this is tricky because you've got to think of something that's very deep, has a history, has an origin story, which usually takes some research. Students have to Google a lot of this stuff. But if you can, think about something that you really like as an idea that you can trace back in history somewhere, and then think about how you might analogize that into a new space to tell someone a story about something new that you think's really interesting, that might take them to another place in the way they think about the world in some way. So it's a tricky task, I understand that, but let's have some fun with it. If you can't go back in history and find a really good historical idea, just come up with a really good current concept, which you can still analogize into a new space creatively to create a story, some kind of narrative that might change the way people see things. Okay.
And just to add, if some of this is lost on you, don't worry. Do not worry. That whole point is through this process, like with the tangled string, it's going to dawn on us slowly as we move together. So just be honest, have real chats. We're all friends here.
Creativity is hard, guys. Creativity is really, really hard. And there's lots of failure. That's okay. That's all part of the learning. Tell me, you've got loads. What's your gravity? I'm going to go to the group I didn't manage to get to at all. So this group here, have you got one that, yes, you looking around? Yeah.
So the big idea is the sort of idea of being embodied. And it comes from phenomenology and philosophy.
Whoa.
So in sort of before phenomenology, philosophy was the pursuit of sort of objective truth, logic, sort of mathematical reasoning. And with the idea of being embodied came the idea that each mind is reasoning from a body, located within a body, with a particular perspective on the world. And that perspective is conditioned by that mind's history and that lived experience of the individual. We were talking about it, sort of analogizing it over to artificial intelligence and bots, and the idea that each bot will be programmed by different programmers, might have a different programming history, different programming inputs. So each bot will kind of be embodied in the way that each person is embodied.
Wow, interesting. I mean, really interesting because people might challenge the very notion of a robot being embodied, right, for the sort of organism reasons. But yeah, really interesting. Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I just want to get one more. Could we have the tectonics one from the back?
I'd sort of thought about plate tectonics, and in history and in antiquity, I suppose, kind of gave us a way to describe how the map was shaped and how the continents kind of formed and how kind of humanity came to understand itself, I suppose. In a sort of modern era, we sort of talk about this sort of tectonic shift in our mindset and how we come to sort of have an entrenched idea of, you know, any idea that we might have, and suddenly we've changed our perception and we've kind of moved from one state to another. It can be a gradual shift rather than a sort of a great change in your mindset. But it's kind of now taken on a kind of whole new life of not really being rooted in the original kind of concept of a geological process. It's actually now a very human emotion that I suppose we all go through.
you could almost say that if you get the right analogy, like friction, like a meme, you cause a tectonic shift in your thinking, other people's thinking. So applying one superconcept to the very notion of superconcepts is a really nice thing to do. Thank you for your participation. That was really entertaining. Take away that you can really change minds with analogies. It's not just an analogy, as people often say. Analogies change literally and tectonically the way people view the world, how they see what's important, the structures of the world and so on. So it's a powerful thing worth practicing, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carl. I just wanted to give you guys just a second to talk a bit about a couple of moments maybe in your lives or in your work where you feel like you've really experienced or grappled with or created immersive, imaginative experiences with and for other people.
There's many examples. I mean, I guess I grew up, as a lot of kids do, like really leaning into living in that imaginary world. And I just thought it'd be really cool to transform my whole bedroom into a rainforest. Thankfully, my parents were very willing to allow me to do that. So not just willing, but like helped me. So I brought trees in, built an actual running waterfall that kind of came down the side of my bedroom and filled up a fish tank. And I had like a CD of jungle sounds that I bought from the Rainforest Cafe that was just always on in the background. There's a whole ecosystem that formed in my bedroom accidentally as well. I found a nest of beetles in there. Anyway, that was kind of my teenage years. It was just for me and my experience and friends and stuff, but I ended up entering it on a TV competition and won this like national competition. There's a show called Homefront on the BBC decades ago, and 1998, Junior Decorator of the Year, I won.
And as a kid in the town, we would drive past because it was on a public street, and I would see this almost billboard of the tropics as the light was on in the room, and I'd look to see if I could see the iguana through the window. And it was an invitation. It was a billboard into another world. And
I got married last year, and we had a wedding that Dave came out to in Costa Rica. We bought some land in an eco-village out there. Oh yeah, Chloe as well. But there was one exercise we did, which was, we were chatting one-on-one, we paired off, and it was talking to the other person from as your 10-year-old self, or as like your 12-year-old self. And it was like, what's happening in your life? Like literally talking to the other person as if you're your 12-year-old self. And I was talking about my jungle room. And it was really mind-blowing because I realized I'd kind of manifested living in the jungle. And we were like in the jungle in Costa Rica, and I was talking about how I've made my life, like I'm like waking up in this kind of imaginary jungle that I've created, even though I was actually just in Surrey, just like in the UK. But it blew my mind, the power of kind of living in that manifestation of what you want.
It's nice to have this contrast, and we were talking before about bravery and creativity, and I think Leo's my son's name, Louis is very brave in what he just does. He just has an idea and goes for it creatively, and I think that's really important to take that risk. But Dave, you taught me actually that I was a risk taker. I'd never thought of myself as a risk taker, and he said, look at this degree program you're creating, there's nothing like this, it could all go horribly wrong, and that's you're taking huge intellectual risks, you said to me, and even huge reputational risk. And I was like, I don't even see that, but you showed me that I was. And so I think that discussion around risk and bravery and creativity is really important, and it might be actually the one thing that unites very different people who create, like Louis and me. I think Louis is very brave in what he does. Maybe other people think I'm brave, but I do think there's an element of that in every creative that is willing to take a risk and do things that might make them look stupid, might go badly wrong, all those sorts of things.
One of the things I created from that conversation was a little diagram showing 5 different types of risk, because that was the thing, it made me delineate, well, what's the difference then? Because we realized that you're a great intellectual risk taker. You can go into all kinds of terrain. Doesn't mean you're a physical risk taker, you might be, but it doesn't mean you're a financial risk taker. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying you're not, but it doesn't mean you're a social risk taker. These are all very different kinds of risk that can be taken. What we were excited about with the Solvi project was looking for the smallest voices with the biggest ideas, because that delta, where they're least capitalized, least listened to, and if they're daring to be brave and utter anything into the world, that gap of resources is the bravest thing. It's the biggest leap. And if we can go and find those people and give them any kind of help or encouragement or support, then that feels like the best thing to do. Michael Green's done some great TED Talks. He runs the Social Progress Imperative. And he basically said to me that his biggest critique of philanthropy is that it doesn't take enough risks, that philanthropy is the passion capital of society. So if there's one kind of capital that should be used in the riskiest possible way, it should be indeed philanthropy. So, and that's when I started to think, well, what would be the riskiest then? And that's how we ended up doing this tour and meeting loads of amazing young people all over the world. To bring it back into the room, I want to just riff together for a minute about what we experience with that thread. But I actually think, and I don't know what you think, tell me your thoughts, that it was easier, one, because there was lots of people, but two, because the lights were out. I actually think that put the focus onto the relationship, this relational thread that connected us all, and encouraged people to move slower rather than sort of bowling around, acting individually. And to your point earlier, we had a clear goal, and I think we were focused on the relational thread. But normally in teams or in communities, that sort of sense of interdependence isn't obvious, and we don't have a pink cord. So anybody got any sort of thoughts as they reflect on that experience that they might want to chuck in the ring?
Because we're highly visual creatures, when you remove your sight somewhat, it gives you access to all the other senses and faculties you have going on. So I think we can feel the room a little bit easier when you remove the vision.
And you pointed out you were surprised how few words were being said.
Yeah, it was kind of done in silence because you don't really need words. Like Dave said as well, I just wish you could have seen the contrast. It was mind-blowing. We were like, literally at the point where we were like, oh, we're so tangled up, let's just cut it.
Let's cut it.
We were literally, before everyone came in, we were like tangled up for 10 minutes trying just to...
It's like, guys, they're coming in 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was literally, we had the knife ready.
Maybe you were focusing too much on the complexity of the exercise, where actually it was very simple. And, very pragmatic, so just walking around and putting things together. But your ideation was maybe very complex to start with, no criticism, obviously. And maybe also there were women in the room. Just joking. Just joking.
Yeah, just picking up on what you said there. So I think the highest state of performance in a group of people is when they're not talking to each other. So like brainstorming works best without talking. People in special forces not able to talk to each other sometimes, but they communicate in another way. So it's a highest state of performance. So you said something about focus and flow and target. So astronauts, when they look back at planet Earth, they get religious experience. So it's called the overview effect. So my theory is, instead of looking backwards at something, if you look forwards and if you set a really, really crazy objective, you get an emotional response to it. So actually, yeah, don't play safe and be super risky. Don't start with smart. Go for something really, really out there.
You did give us a very clear end goal. So I guess the question is, what would happen if you didn't give us that?
Just before we bring it back in and move on, is there anybody that wouldn't normally fancy getting on the mic? That's normally a bit not their cup of tea, but they actually have a little thought or reflection that if I give a little bit of awkward silence, they might be willing to share.
There's a finger being pointed.
Only if they want to, though. They've got to put themselves up for it.
There was a lot more of us